So, in this episode, we are speaking with Amy LaMeyer, and we really did a deep dive into female founders' journeys and how they can seek investment in this space. One of my favorite things with this was really talking about how startups can prepare for a downturn in the economy and also how they can look towards kind of preparing themselves for readiness in the future.
And I actually really enjoyed the conversation that we had about the role of the metaverse and Web3 in entertainment, and particularly in the music industry. And what about you, Amy?
Well, I always love talking about our portfolio companies. I think what they're doing is really amazing, but it's also was fun to dive into diversity and the importance and progress that this space has made in that area.
Brought to you by Accenture Extended Reality. This is Field of View.
Hello and welcome to Field of View, the podcast that expands your vision on all things the metaverse. And my name is Nick Rosa from Accenture.
And my name is Daniel Kolayani, the Chief Executive at the Academy of International Extended Reality.
And today we're going to talk about venture investing, right, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a person here who has a fantastic career and background in corporate finance and development and a real passion, I think, for seeing female founders succeed.
And it's with the greatest pleasure that we welcome Amy LaMeyer to our podcast. Hi, Amy. How are you doing?
Nice to see you. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here.
So we usually start asking all of our guests about their origin story. Would you like to give us a little bit of a background about how you started your career and what led you to what you're doing right now?
Sure. Most of the time in my tech career was at a company called Akamai Technologies. So Akamai back in the late 90s and early 2000s was helping to build and scale the internet. It was a really exciting time. We were helping to connect people and share information across the globe. Most of the time there I was in M&A and acquiring companies and helping to merge them into ours. In 2016, we were doing diligence at CES in Vegas on a cybersecurity company, and I saw someone use virtual reality for the first time. The Rift and the Vive had just come out. And I thought, oh, that's the next wave of computing. Like, it's early, but we'll communicate with each other in a spatial way, in a more natural and humanistic way, if we can, right? That's the way technology is going. So I shifted my career and started to learn about this space, angel invest, and advise startups. And eventually was mentoring for an organization called WXR, which stood for Women in XR, that was founded by Martina Welkoff, Malia Probst, and Abigail Albright. And over the course of the year, what they were doing with their accelerator program, the startup accelerator program, was proving that there were enough women in tech, in XR in particular, that would allow for a fund, a venture fund. And they did that over the course of the year. And Martina asked me to join as we got to know each other. And we did our first close in 2019 and now have 12 companies in our portfolio. All of them have women leaders and are across all different types of verticals and sectors.
So taking it way back then, like what inspired you to actually pursue a career in this sector?
Yeah, I was looking for what is that next wave of computing. Like the internet had been out, it was becoming a commodity to a certain extent. Cybersecurity, which is what Akamai was doing, is fighting an enemy all the time, and I'm about connecting. And seeing virtual reality and then hearing about what augmented reality could do made me realize that we could live in a world where there was much more fluidity between the digital world and the real world. And that the thought of a heads up, hands free world way of interacting with computing was really appealing.
I have a question related to the specifics of your fund. You said that you are funding startups that are women-led. What's the biggest challenge right now for a woman that wants to open their own startup and their own company from your point of view, and especially in the field of metaverse and extended reality?
For sure. I mean, the good news is, and part of the reason that we focus on female founders and women founders is the hope that diversity in general will be more fulfilled, because diversity obviously is far more than gender. But this is a focus, an easier thesis focus. And being from technology and being one of the few women back then, and Martina was in the gaming space, which also is a very male dominated space. We both felt the need to have a more diverse set of perspectives as we're building this new computing paradigm. So that's why that was the purpose of the fund as it started, and it was what I was doing from an angel perspective in angel investing as well.
So from that, I mean, in terms of that, I mean, obviously, if you're focusing on kind of women-led founders and trying to bring kind of more of those kind of diversity of people into this sector, I mean, what are some of those biggest barriers that you see right now to kind of women pursuing careers in this space?
Yeah, I mean, most of it is network, right? So a lot, particularly the funding networks. The male-based funding networks have been in existence for many, many years. And so what we've seen is that it's just harder to make the connections. And there's a certain amount of bias that's been proven and documented about how female founders have to prove themselves in deeper ways than maybe a male founder does. There's a little bit more trust that a male can execute. Even though there are studies from Deloitte and Touche that say that female founders and particular diverse teams execute much better and have much higher chance of success. What we're seeing just from a statistical perspective in terms of funding is 2% of US funding dollars are going to women-only funds or women-only led startups. And about 14% is going to diverse teams, so both women and men. That means, the 80+% is going to male-only founded companies. And so you can see that there's really an unequal allocation of funding. And what we saw during the pandemic is right before the pandemic, that was shifting and it was becoming more funding for the diverse teams and women. And then during the pandemic, that all pulled back. Everyone went back to, the networks that they knew and the people that they trusted. And those tended to be, reinforcing the male networks. So now as we're moving through the pandemic, we're hoping to see a shift again.
And Amy, now I just want to roll back a little bit about your career and what you were doing at Akamai. Akamai is known to provide security services for infrastructure led broadcasters and internet websites that have to deliver huge quantities of data, and they provide a secure way to deliver those data. We see a lot of problems right now that are arising in companies that are delivering metaverse and XR content, and there's a new wave of cybersecurity problems that are coming with this new wave of technologies. How much are you involved in the security space with what you're doing with your fund, and what is, from your point of view, that is going to be needed in the future of this new technology that is the metaverse in order to be more secure for everybody?
So it's a great question and an important one. We see hundreds of pitches per year, and I have never seen a female-founded security startup in the XR space.
Why do you think that?
It's a good, well, in part, I think it's that there are a few security companies in general right now. It is a topic that gets discussed. There are some, the IEEE, and there's a couple different groups that focus on it, in particular XRSI. There's another nonprofit group called the XR Guild. run by Avi Barzev, that is starting to dig into these topics, and you'll see people like Kent Bai report on them quite prolifically, but not a concerted. I think because we're in this emerging tech space, there isn't a particular concerted effort towards that yet, until someone hits a particular boundary, like Facebook requiring Facebook logins, that makes people scream and shout. So I think it's this push and pull of building the technology and making it and understanding security and privacy that's going to go back and forth for a while. Hopefully we've learned from the internet, and it seems like we are, that we're at least thinking about these things early as the technology is being developed.
Going, on that subject that you were talking about, especially with, because I find it fascinating when we talk about being able to bring more opportunities to a diverse group of people. Is it right in thinking that, I guess, there's a systemic change or systemic kind of reason in terms of that needs to happen first, and another enabler that has to happen in addition to providing more funding opportunities to kind of underrepresented groups? Namely, I guess, when you look at kind of fields of like STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, which are historically more broadly represented by kind of men in this kind of field. Is it right to look at just the provide more funding opportunities, or should there be more focus on the actual, I guess, quote unquote STEM of the challenges here in particular?
Yeah, it's a great point, and you're right. It's not just a single solution here. It's not just a funding relationship solution. It's been a pleasure. One of our companies is called Prisms of Reality, and they're actually creating virtual reality content for learning math and different types of math. And it's been interesting to see how that really resonates with all genders, and hopefully inspires. But yeah, from female founder support to going back to Girls Who Code, and all the way back into inspiring schools. But I am hoping as well that just by seeing more women present and in speaking roles and in panels and writing books and being out there as something to aspire to, that we're going to motivate the younger women to be on a leadership and an entrepreneurial track.
I mean, do you think that there's still, obviously there's a lot of social and cultural factors that go into things as well. I mean, do you think that there's still this perception with technology that it is just a boys' club, or do you think it's different for this particular space of immersive technology and the metaverse? Because, from what I've seen just alone, in terms of the amount of initiatives and the amount of support and people out there, it's really, really quite amazing to see how much is being pulled into enabling some of these things. So I don't know if you think that's an older view, or if things are actually changing.
I do think that the XR space is different. I do think that things are changing, but I don't think that we can let up, right? We're really fortunate to have had, I've been in this space for 6 years, fortunate to have a rolling series of female-focused networking groups and learning groups, anything from AR/VR Academy to Women in XR to Women Building the Metaverse, to XR Women. Like there are many groups out there that are willing to support, and their purpose is to support more gender engagement in this space. So I also see a lot of support from male allies who will say, who do you have on this panel? And won't speak on a panel unless there's some gender diversity and potentially racial diversity as well. Like there's both topics need to be addressed for sure. And that's been so refreshing. Groups on Twitter of here are women speakers. You see AWE has, I think they were at 152 female speakers in this past conference that they had in June. So that's, the support across the board is really encouraging.
And Amy, now I think that's probably it's time to disclose a little bit more about the company that you're supporting. You probably have a very diverse portfolio of companies that you're funding in your fund, but can you tell us a little bit more about, I don't know, the 3 or 4 companies that are the most exciting one in your portfolio, and why they're so exciting?
Yeah, it's obviously super hard to choose,
Yeah.
because I
It's like
really,
asking who your favorite child is, right?
yeah, I really love them all. And you know, we're lucky because we get to work with all of them very closely. It's a relatively small fund, and so therefore we're really rolling up our sleeves and helping them all grow at this point. But you know, Obsess was one of the early ones. They were part of the accelerator way back when. They do virtual stores. Neha Singh is the CEO based in New York City. Definitely check them out if you haven't so far. That they've worked with lots of different brands and continue to put out content frequently. Definitely one of the lead voices in retail for XR. So that one's really exciting. I'm also really interested in Scatter. So Yasmin and James, they're the founders, and that's their product is Depth Kit. And so that's using Xbox Connect sensors, just a few, right? Less than 10, 3 to 10, to capture a volumetric, mostly they're focused on humans, and ultimately live stream them, right? I'm really looking, particularly after all the Zoom calls we've done for the past 2.5 years, I'm really looking forward to engaging on a volumetric level. It would be so fun if all of us were sitting on a couch rather than just Brady bunching or, looking at each other in squares. So I'm really interested in what they're doing as well. I mentioned Prisms on the education side. Super, super interesting what they're doing in that space. We invest in AI as well. There's some interesting ones that I think will ultimately intersect with augmented and virtual reality. So, for example, Empathic uses machine learning to suggest tonal differences in what you're saying in order to more communicate in a more empathic way. And I think that'll help everybody from, humans to bots to avatars in the future. So that's really an interesting one as well.
And going back to the topic of AI in the metaverse, there are a lot of conversations that are happening right now on how to build a responsible metaverse and how to ensure that is not going to be another social media catastrophe like the one that's happened in the last 10 years with all the data leaks and mass manipulation and so on. One of the interesting conversation that has been led by one of our future guests, which is Louis Rosenberg, that's is the CEO of Unanimous AI, is the use of biometric data and deep data in the metaverse to create chatbots that are able to sell you everything they want, just using a deep understanding of your emotional ticks. So what makes you excited about things using data. Do you have a sort of a code of conduct in your fund to invest in specific companies that are making an ethical use of the technology, or do you have anything like this right now in place?
We don't have it written into our investing agreements, but it is something that we absolutely consider and do deep diligence on with the founders as we're talking to them about and considering whether or not to invest. And then we're on many of the boards of the company as well, which the boards obviously have heavy influence on the company itself. So it is certainly, biometrics is certainly an aspect of privacy and security that is one of the most frightening, and definitely one we need to keep an eye on for sure.
So let's say I am a startup. I've just I've just met you. We've just walked into an elevator together.
Yeah.
And I just found out that, oh, well, you're really experienced and you know a lot of the investment scene when it comes to this. What should I be saying to you as a startup when I walk in that elevator to be able to say, by the time we leave that elevator, that you want to invest? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah. So WXR invests in early stage, so mostly seed level and a few pre-seed startups. Again, VRAR AI and at least one female founder. So the first thing I check for is, does it meet that thesis? And once we get beyond that, which I get pitched by a surprising amount of male-only companies, so that just don't understand that we have a thesis that is that specific. But really what I'm looking for is, does the founder understand the problem that they're solving, right? Is somebody using technology for technology's sake? We're a technology-based investment fund, but we want to make sure that they're using technology to solve a real problem. And so that's one of the reasons that I really love Prism's. Anarupa was a teacher first and then worked in the educational system and then decided there's a better way to teach math and then found virtual reality, right? And so instead of saying, I love VR, how can I use it? Which also may be able to solve a problem, but it's really important that the problem is understood. And then secondly, is the time now, right? Are you building something for AR glasses, but AR glasses really aren't prevalent right now, particularly for consumers, right? And so that would be, we all hope that that will happen in the next few years. But how do you keep your company running for the next few years until AR glasses are out there for the masses, for example? So is the timing right and the market right? And then third, are you the team to build it? Like, how do I know, what are the things that you would tell me that would let me know that you're the right team to make this actually happen? So those are the things I look for: the product, the market, and the team.
Do you find that's a problem quite often in terms of people? I guess it comes down to this concept, right, of people designing for a technology, but not necessarily for a need. So they're like, okay, we want to use virtual reality, or we want to use augmented reality, or we want to use Web3 or whatever it is. And they're not really understanding the fundamentals of what goes into having, what is the problem you're solving? Does that happen often?
Yeah, there was a spike of it, I would say, over the past year, particularly related to Web3 and NFTs, right? And cryptocurrency, because there was so much hype there, and Metaverse in general, right? Because there's been so much hype in that space, you saw a lot of people saying, oh, okay, what can I build there? But not really understanding what it meant to do that, or how hard it was to create something in that space and make a sustainable business. So yeah, we saw a spike in companies where we didn't think it was going to be a sustainable way for them to grow.
And Amy, one question that I have that is on top of my mind. The metaverse is opening a lot of opportunities for companies that are not only creating technology, but they're also providing services in the metaverse. I know that, especially in the Silicon Valley, technology is king. But what do you think of service-led metaverse company? For example, I know of a company that is specialized in producing events and concerts in the metaverse. They don't own their own technology, but they're specialized in the production of those events. And then they have potentially, a potential spin-off in collecting user data and so on. Is it something that you're also considering, or technology is still and platforms are still the king in venture investing?
I think that's exactly right. For venture, you're looking for some sort of a sustainable, scalable business model. And with services, it doesn't necessarily scale, right? So a platform implies that there's there's something that can grow without growing headcount, but services models usually mean that you're growing the headcount in order to grow the revenue. I'm not saying I think that services businesses can be fantastic, but they should focus on on revenue-based opportunities and paying their business from that perspective, I think, instead of venture.
This is really interesting because I speak to a lot of AIXR members, for example, who they join the academy for one reason or another, mostly because they want a network or community of other people. What's been really interesting to me is when speaking to a lot of these companies, especially the service-based companies, a lot of them are looking to make that pivot into being a platform-based organization because they want that security of recurring revenue without increasing their headcount. Do you have any thoughts, I guess, on how a startup or an organization that is primarily service-based could make that move into platform-based so that they could afford that more security?
I think it's fundamentally different skill sets. So I'm not saying it can't happen, but it just definitely takes a different way of thinking. Building a scalable platform is different than you're still working with customers and you're still making sure that you're serving a customer, but it's vastly different than working with a customer to give them to provide a service or a special a project, completion, right? They're two different sets of skills. How do you identify what someone needs and then create that for them versus here is a recurring system that needs to scale and be usable by many, many, many different customers. So it's a different mindset. So they should make sure that they're considering that as they decide whether or not to pivot. Because there can be a very lucrative business on the services side too. It's just different set of margins.
In terms of the field that are the hottest right now that you're seeing, and the field that you consider that should be the hottest from your point of view, the ones that you would love to invest more, can you give us a little bit of an overview of both? What's really trending right now, and what makes sense to keep doing, and what is missing from your point of view, and what founders should think more about eventually creating?
Yeah. Really hot right now is, obviously media and entertainment, any sort of gaming. That makes a lot of sense because virtual reality is, it started there. And you saw a lot of support from companies like Meta for the gaming space. But also retail, a lot in retail, digital fashion, e-commerce, and then enterprise training, a lot in that space, and shifting over to manufacturing. Really useful use cases there as well that are easy to see the ROI. I am a music fan. I love music even more than I love virtual and augmented reality, which is hard to believe because I like it a lot. And so there's a lot happening in that space, but I'd like
Yeah.
to see something that's a little bit easier for artists to use. I think the hang up there is that it's hard to engage and create content in a metaverse like space. So I'm constantly looking for what is that platform. There's a couple out there that I think are getting close. A couple out there that have pivoted. You see companies like The Wave pivoted away from VR, and I understand that virtual reality headsets are still in the process of being comfortable and cost effective and having enough content for the masses to participate. We've seen a lot of growth, particularly thanks to the Oculus Quest for being only $299, but we still need to get them as usable as a phone. So I think you'll see more growth in that area in the future, but music is a space. I also think remote productivity, again, really interested in seeing how can we enable workers to work from home in a way that is more three-dimensional. Companies like The Wild, which is a virtual space that allows architects and designers to interact with each other virtually, that was acquired by Autodesk. I think that was really interesting. Also seeing companies like Shapes XR, which is a portfolio company of ours that's looking to connect storytellers and animators by giving them tools to do that in a virtual space. I think
And
those
Shapes kind of came out of nowhere for me recently. I mean, I was looking at like things, and all of a sudden, Shapes kind of just exploded onto the scene.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really excited about them. It makes content creation super easy. And that's one of like I said, that's one of the three keys for me from a virtual reality perspective, but also eventually augmented reality. How do you most easily support content creation?
And I mean, you just say the magic word to me, which is music. My background is in music and broadcasting. I'm a huge uh, fan of all things music production, but
What have you done,
also
Amy? You've started
distribution.
us on this
Okay.
long road now.
My question for you is, first of all, I wanted to understand a little bit more if your interest in the metaverse for musicians and the distribution of the content is more about the experiential side, so 3D worlds and 3D spaces, but also if you dabbed into this big opportunity that there's also in the blockchain and NFT space for artists in order to better monetize their craft and their art that right now is probably a little bit exploited by streaming services.
Mhm. And I love, so just to, so the answer is all of it.
Perfect.
And
Amazing.
yeah, and on the NFT side, what I love about the possibility of it and blockchain is just that potential for the distribution of funds to go back to the artist, right? To
Yeah.
continue to get more more of the monetary benefit back to the people that are making the music. And I think that that's my hope for blockchain and music.
I've seen some platforms that are really interesting that are related to um, the utilization, the tokenization of athletes and sports people
Mm,
in order to fund their career as an alternative to sponsorship,
mhm,
which is super interesting because if you are really following the scene and if you're really following, for example, football players since they're 13 and you have an eye for that stuff, you can make some money just, investing in a person that you believe is going to be very successful in the future. But I
mhm.
haven't seen something similar right now in the music field or in arts in general. D-
Yeah.
Do you think that this is due to the fact that y- there's this kind of common knowledge that there's no money to make in the music business, or it's something that's probably because the technology is not yet mature enough to go into minor popular, I mean, I don't know how less popular than sports is music, but I mean, surely is not as popular in terms of investing and betting than sports right now. So do you think that this is due to the fact that there's a perception that music there's no money to make, or is something that is going to arrive later just because we started with sports and then music is going to arrive later?
I also think that music licensing just throws a wrench into the complication of that as well. And what
True.
does it mean to license music and then use it in other platforms? So I think it's just a little bit more complicated. I would love to see it happen. As a super fan, as an early super fan of many bands, it would be a pleasure to support early bands and see where they go. So I hope it moves in that direction. I have seen a couple different platforms there, but nothing that's really taken off or is big at this point.
Well, Amy, you've also were a early stage, I guess, advisor for I guess a company called Mellow Drive, which is now called Infinite Album, which sees the combining of music with AI
Mhm.
to create adaptive kind of music, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's a really interesting company right now that they're working a lot with streamers, folks on Twitch or YouTube. And the concept is, and the other thing I love about it is that thought of we're creating this whole metaverse, but the metaverse, if you go into some of the metaverses, they're quiet, right? And so there's like a whole world of music that can be created. And how do you do that, both enabling musicians, but also creating it with AI? So filling these virtual worlds with music. But yeah, Infinite Album is working right now with how do you shift emotion given what's happening on a screen. So if somebody's doing Twitch, gaming on Twitch, how does that emotion change with the game?
Yeah, I guess that could really have implications, I guess, longer term for creating emotive environments and immersive environments as well. It's really interesting. I was reading a fascinating article by in the Guardian recently, which was talking about syncing. I don't know if you guys know too much about this, but this was brought up recently, quite big, because of I guess like what we'd call like the Stranger Things effect, where you had that beautiful Kate Bush song play throughout the entire Stranger Things kind of season.
Running up the hill.
Running up the hill. There we go. And this idea of like how television and film is being used to revive kind of music and art kind of forms from kind of earlier years to a new generation of listeners. So I'm interested to see, I guess, even for you, Nick, because you have that passion for music, how things like syncing, which is being used in television and film, might actually have a role to play within immersive technology, and also kind of, I guess, have an effect on what we're talking about with ownership over music as well within the blockchain as well.
Amy, would you like to start, or shall I start?
I've been starting. Feel free to start.
Well, I think that we've seen this for many years in the in the field of gaming. I'm a really good friend of a guy that was working at Sony Music, licensing, soundtracks for video games, and the kind of stuff that they licensed for those games was exceptional. I mean, if you go on the GTA series, you can find some fantastic music and radio stations that are curated by international DJs and so on. But I think that's probably the most interesting aspect of the pandemic, and the diffusion of the methodologies of music production that right now is so easy to do at home. Like if you have an Ableton Live and a Mac, you can produce any kind of music right now. Drove the industry a little bit to what was the video game industry in the early 80s. There's a lot of music everywhere, but the quality is below the average. It's not exactly great. And talking about articles, I read another wonderful article the other day on one of the leading online music magazines that was saying that the new music streaming is shrinking. People are listening more to all the classics like Running Up the Hill from Kate Bush or Master of Puppets from Metallica and so on, because the average quality of the music is going down. And I believe that metaverse platforms and video games and TV shows and all this kind of media content produced on mainstream platform are really helping driving this new wave of discovery that probably has been a little bit didn't get a lot of attention from the streaming services recently. I mean, if you are a fan that listen only to 80s and 90s music, of course you can listen to classics. But if you're a Gen Y or Gen Z, right now it's very difficult to find people that age that are listening to, I don't know, to Depeche Mode or to The Cure and so on. And the great merit of this TV shows and video games and platform is that they're finally giving a little bit more of a proper classic music education to new generation. What do you think, Amy?
I have to disagree with you on this one.
Really?
Thanks for the conversation. I think that because there's such an easy way to share and create, right? You can grab a laptop and make music, that there's so much more music out there. But I definitely feel like there's still really high quality music. It's just that because there's so much more, maybe it seems like the quality isn't as good. But you look at somebody like Jacob Collier, he's a genius, right? Like his
I
microtone
agree.
stuff is absolutely incredible. The the virtuosos are still out there. You're wading through a little bit more content in order to get there. And I'd rather it be that way, right? I'm glad that people are experimenting with music, even if it isn't as easy to find as a classic, but also glad that the classics are coming back, right? Like music is such a connector and such a way to uplift society that anything in that space, I feel like is a win.
I mean, for the curious that want to check out the article that I read about it is on musicbusinessworldwide.com, and is called "It's Official: New Music is Shrinking in Popularity." And he's saying that there's a new report that's has been created by a subsidiary of Nielsen, that is showing that the total album consumption of current recorded music in the United States in the first half of 2022 fell of 1.4% in volume versus the equivalent metric from the same period of 2021. So that's why I'm citing my
Yeah,
fonts. I'm not just making it up. So if
I
you
believe
want to
you.
check it out.
I believe
Okay.
you. Yeah, I mean, it also is proven trend that most people, as they age, like get stuck in a particular time warp and don't continue to listen to new music. I'm fascinated to see if that shifts as new generations age. It is not how I function. I'm completely the opposite. If there's a song that's overplayed, I'm done with it. Like it
Oh
needs to
yeah.
go. I'm always looking for the new thing, but I do realize that with most people, it's the other way around.
So, I mean, shifting gears a little bit.
We can talk about music forever. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, we'll start a new music podcast just for you two, just to set that one up. There you go.
But metaverse is also music. It's not just
No, I
visual,
agree.
and it's not just NFTs and crypto. It's also audio.
Well,
Audio
that's
is
why.
super important for immersiveness.
But that's why I refer to it as the human like when we talk about immersive technology, I talk about it as the human interface, right? Where the human interface is not just our eyes and sight, but it's also sound, it's smell, it's taste. All of these things will come into play. So I like to view it less about like VR and AR, but more about these are the human interfaces that we interact with the metaverse with. So from that
Right.
perspective. I mean, look, it's no doubt that a lot of firms and kind of people in the space are preparing themselves for a kind of a downturn. Are preparing themselves to extend that. They're being told to extend their runways. They're being told to prepare for kind of poorer economic circumstances. So I just want to ask you, kind of Amy. I mean, based on your experience, and I think we were talking about this when it comes to this idea of we passed the VR winter, right? But based on that experience and seeing how VR companies survived, and now how we've got a broader sense of metaverse companies and kind of different tech companies in the space, I guess what can these newer companies to the scene be doing to actually prepare for a recession and to prepare for poor economic circumstances at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, preparation is absolutely crucial. Certainly, I would recommend everyone look at their runway and make sure that there's at least, uh, you know, a vision to 24 months of cash flow, if possible. But there are two reasons that I'm more optimistic about XR companies in this particular situation versus the VR winter. And one is, though there is a market downturn, right? That means the stock market in particular is feeling some pain. Longer term investments like venture can be more appealing during this time. Right. And we're in this state where if someone's investing in an emerging technology like XR, they're not expecting that return for many years. And so it's a longer term investment. You also see creativity tend to be, and a whole new set of companies come out of down markets. That's the case, has been the case repeated over and over again. The Facebooks and the eBays and the Ubers all came out from a down market. And also, I think that because we are, in this pandemic state where there's been a new awakening of the benefit of virtual, I think that XR companies will benefit from that, will continue to benefit from that. We all understand what it's like to communicate virtually and the benefits of that, not having to get on a plane to talk to someone. We're all used to FaceTime and Zoom and Teams and whatever it is we're using to communicate, and looking for new ways to do that, to continue to do that, and as well as be live. So I think that's a positive trajectory for XR companies during this down market.
Do we think that obviously with we talk about, you just mentioned about that separation, right, between the stock markets, but also I guess just the market in general for XR companies. Do we think that if we find, though, given how close the industry is linked in with big tech companies like Meta and Microsoft and organizations like that, if they are finding that they have to tighten their belts, or that they have to do things differently now, which could potentially see them having to make bigger changes based on just their performance in the stock market, could that have a knock-on effect for metaverse companies that aren't on that playing field?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's important to definitely take a look at your operating expenses and to be lean. But again, we're on the trajectory of an expansion and a growth and a usage of virtual and augmented technologies. There's an awareness of how spatial computing and immersivity and that sense of presence can enable and add value to both our business and our human connections. And so, even with a down market, I don't see that going away. I think it just slows down a bit.
So what could these startups do to reposition their pitch deck, or to reposition their value proposition during this period?
Yeah, it's a good question, because a lot of people were floating on hype before, right? Here's an idea in this space that's getting a lot of financial traction. Cryptocurrency or blockchain or NFTs or metaverse are the words that come to mind, the technology bingo set. The key is to really have a solution that's going to add value, and particularly for consumers or companies that are less impacted by the downturn of the market. And the value proposition is just so key. So focus on what is that value that you're bringing to consumers or to enterprises.
I mean, the value is an important conversation. There's been a moment, especially during the mid 90s, when the internet exploded, especially in the Silicon Valley, that people started using the technology just for the sake of using the technology. And sometimes I still can see, I saw this trend in the XR space, and now I can see the same kind of trend in the metaverse space. And when it comes to the creation of value, there's a huge problem that is what kind of need are you solving? That's a lot of people, a lot of founders, they don't understand. They just see the excitement of using the shiny new object that is the technology. But this also potentially leads to misuse of the technology. So sometimes we are using the technology just for the sake of using the technology without thinking about the possible consequences of the technology. No, I don't want to go back to the ethical use of the metaverse, because we already covered this, and you told me that you're driving the conversation with your clients, with the companies that you're investing right now, especially because you're part of their board of directors. But what I wanted to ask you is, do you still see a lot of companies that are using this, are having this kind of let's use the technology just because it's cool approach, or right now there's a more user-centric, let's solve a problem kind of approach in the companies that are presented to you at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. And particularly talking about this summer, seeing a shift back to here is the value that we will provide companies, because the concept of having a sales pipeline and getting traction is now is again a requirement for raising money
Yeah.
at this point.
So
Yeah.
let's say these organizations have got that part right. They've got the actual value proposition there. They've got a very good product or to push forward here. What are the biggest, I guess, reasons or that startup might still fail?
Is it the right time? Right?
Hmm.
Are they relying on a headset or a wearable um, that isn't ready yet, that can't scale with them? I think that's a big one. Um, or do they have the right contacts and the right ability to gain that traction in order to raise money? It is not for the faint of heart to be an entrepreneur, as I'm sure you know, and as I'm sure you've had discussions with other folks. It's a roller coaster ride, and that passion and that belief and that resilience of getting through even the hard times, whether that be hiring a team or whether it be working your sales channel or whether it's be your fundraising process. All of that is just so important for a founder to make it.
I mean, that area, like you said the key word there, resilience. I think that's like a really underestimated trait, I guess, of entrepreneurs in particular. I think, you know, sometimes I mean, I've listened to a few really good other podcasts and other people in this space, and also just speaking to other founders. One of the things that I've seen is being a founder, especially if you're a single founder or if you're kind of at the top there, it can be lonely, right? Um,
Mm.
and having to navigate through some of these challenges and things like that. I think, you know, one of the mistakes that I've personally seen from some founders is just not spending enough time on thinking who is in their network and who can they access and tap into and kind of to do that journey where they're not alone. So it's interesting because I think that area of resilience, I mean, matters a lot, because you are having to drive something forward that is going to have those ups and downs.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's really key to have a supportive mentor advisory network to get you through those times. And that'll shift over time as the company grows. You have a different set of folks that you rely on, but it is lonely at the top, and it's important to have a good support network to help you through.
And I think that with this we can close the podcast in a really nice way. Thank you so much, Evan, for being with us.
Such a
I just
pleasure.
have one last question, if you allow me,
Of course.
which is, what are the most important three piece of advice that you would like to give to a female founder that would like to start their own company? The most top three or top two piece of advice that you would like to give to a female founder?
Sure. I'm going to just summarize a few of the things we've touched on in this podcast because I think they're
Sure.
the right themes. We'll start with the one that we were just talking about. Make sure you have a good support network. Find people that can support you, whether or not it's the XR groups or advisors for your particular solution that you're trying to solve, or other female founders. All of those groups exist, and a good way to find them is on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Certainly any XR female founder is welcome to reach out to me at amy@WXRfund.com or DM me on Twitter at Amy LaMeyer. Also, make sure that you really know your problem, the problem area, right? We talked about that, like creating a solution, a product that will really solve a problem and solve a need. I think that's really important. And the third would be do some research on what it's like to be a founder if you haven't been one before. Y Combinator has a great library on how to do that. there's some really good venture capital newsletters and podcasts that I think are interesting, and just make sure that you understand what you're getting into before jumping into the journey.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for being with us, Amy. This has been great.
Really a pleasure.
Bye. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to remind to our viewer and our listener that Field of View is out every month with a new episode. And if you like the episode, you can click subscribe. We are all on all the streaming platform, in video on YouTube and Spotify right now, and in audio on all the other podcast platform. So thank you so much, Amy, again. And thank you, Daniel. And we'll catch up on the next episode of Field of View.
Did you know you can catch this full episode of Field of View and more by subscribing on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts to not miss another immersive technology moment? Subscribe today.